I'm Savannah.
And I'm Elysia.
And this is Burden of Proof. Welcome back.
Welcome, everyone. Welcome, new listeners.
Yes, hello to all of our newbies. We love you. We're happy you're here.
Welcome to our loyal listeners.
Yes.
I always say welcome to new people because, I don't want them to feel lost and left out. But our loyal listeners are just as important.
You guys are the frickin' bomb diggity.
Yes. We love you.
We do. We love you guys so much. The parasocial relationship is real.
Truly.
Between us and our listeners.
Truly.
It goes both ways.
It does. It does. So, last week was Bruce MacArthur.
It was.
Wonderful.
We're
recording this in advance, so we have no idea if you've enjoyed it or not, but we hope you have.
I'm sure that they have, honestly.
Yeah, it was a good one.
Thank
in
you.
My opinion.
I thought so. It was a good one to cover. I love me some Ontario.
Yeah.
Ontario crimes.
It's good to get out of the U.S.
Oh, especially in the weeks that we were having, because I wrote that case while watching the presidential debate, so I was really, Toronto and Ontario and Canada has their own, issues, but it was a nice little escape there for a minute.
On behalf of the U.S.,
we're sorry for our shit show.
We're sorry.
Yeah.
So sorry.
I have a group of friends who live in Toronto, and they just laugh at us all the time. And I'm like, laugh at your own problems. This is our Thanksgiving dinner family shame.
Mm-hmm. For all the world to see.
Yep. But anyway, what do you have for us this week? I don't think we have any business.
I don't think so. Not right now.
Alrighty.
So we can jump right in.
Okay. What do you have for us?
Today we have the Rogers family murders. But it's quite a complicated tale. So it actually includes the whole story. It really includes several crimes by more than one individual. So that's why I chose to focus on the victims.
Okay.
To tie it all together.
Okay. Do I need a whiteboard?
No, I think I think it's fairly easy to follow. But I also honestly prefer focusing on the victims. I know that doesn't always help us in our whole SEO.
Yeah.
But
I think sometimes it's more important for us to stick to what we know is our values rather than SEO.
Yeah. I just feel icky. I mean, sometimes you have to, especially if you're talking about a serial killer. It's not that we're trying to glorify that person or bring more fame to them. It's just that how do you, in this context, in the podcasting world especially, but in anything, even documentaries and whatever, there's so many victims that you can't name something with 15 people's names. So yeah. So sometimes it's for that reason, but generally speaking, whenever possible, I'm sure our regular listeners have already noticed that I like to center around the victims whenever possible. And in this case, I think it works.
Okay, perfect.
It works. And to understand where we ultimately end up, you kind of need to understand the Rogers family backgrounds. So Hal and Joan, better known as Jo, so I'll refer to her as Jo throughout. Hal and Jo Rogers both grew up in Van Wert. That's fun.
Yeah, okay.
I'm sorry. Some words just are weird to say.
Van Wert. That is a weird word.
Van Wert County, Ohio, along the western border of Indiana. The couple met in high school and married shortly after when Jo was pregnant with their eldest daughter, Michelle.
Alrighty, we have someone who did not beat teen pregnancy.
Yeah. They had a romantic weekend-long honeymoon at the Hospitality Inn in the idyllic city of Fort Wayne, Indiana.
Beautiful. I'm sure it is beautiful.
The couple were incredibly hard workers. Together with Hal's brother, Joan Rogers, they purchased a dairy farm in the small town of Wilshire, Ohio, which sits just a half a mile from the Ohio-Indiana border. Hal and Joe went on to have another daughter, Christe, a few years after Michelle was born. And like every other family that runs a farm, they all pitched in. On top of her duties at the farm, Joe worked a third shift job at a distribution warehouse to supplement their income and provide health insurance for the family.
Okay.
She would get home from work in the early morning hours, help finish milking the cows, help get the kids off to school, eat breakfast if she had time, and then sleep some before the kids came back from school. Then it was time for midday milking, and then she'd have to cook dinner, and then she'd take a nap, or try to, before heading back to work at the distribution center. Can you imagine?
No, I'm genuinely trying to wrap my head around that. I mean, you said farm life, and I was like, oh, the farm life is not for me. You know, that's a lot. And then to add on working a full-time job, working nights, like,
yeah,
that's
yeah. People, and one of my sources, people said it definitely took its toll.
Oh, working nights is so hard on your body.
Yes.
Much less just being sleep deprived from doing the work of 4 people.
And generally speaking, the bulk of our story takes place in the late 1980s. Joe is only in her like mid to late 30s, and she looks easily like 10 years older.
Right.
Because of how hard she worked and the lack of sleep.
Yeah.
And everything. But it just goes to show how committed to this life they were.
Right.
And on one hand, I don't want to commend. It's one of those things. We're in a weird space and time in history, if you will, when it comes to, I think there's something to be said for really hard work, but also don't kill yourself.
Yeah, I'm a big proponent of like anti-hustle culture. I mean, I obviously think you should work hard at your career and you should do the best that you can. But at the same time, you need to have a life outside of that and take care of yourself. But it sounds like they were kind of in a tough position where they needed healthcare. And that is the main issue, I think.
Yes. Yeah.
Because, and
when you run a farm, like, there are no days off.
No. Unless you have ranch
The cows
hands.
need milked. And and they had some people to help.
I can't. I hate the word milk. I hate it. It just makes me so uncomfortable.
I'm sorry. But this is all just to give you an idea of their life and how we end up where we end up. And yeah.
Well, and sleep deprivation in and of itself, like, it's insane. Okay.
Yeah. So friends and family close to Joe described her as an independent and strong-willed woman, but also very optimistic, and she had no difficulty making friends everywhere she went. But as we just discussed, by the late 1980s, the nonstop work, lack of consistent sleep, and raising kids had taken its toll. Still only in her 30s, some say she looked much older and she'd lost her spark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So if we've talked a little bit before about my fiance and how he works the late shift at the hospital. He works second shift. So he works like 1 to 1 or 11 to 11.
Right.
When he comes home on his 3rd or 4th day of doing that, you can tell.
Yeah.
And it, takes a day or 2 before he looks like a human being again.
Yeah.
I can't imagine.
But after years of doing stuff like that.
And she doesn't have a break.
You don't bounce back. You're just kind of in such a deep fatigued state.
Right. And she never had a break, really. Where,
Yep.
So I know what you're talking about. It's tough.
Yeah. Undoubtedly, the stress of farm life had taken its toll, but the perception of Joe in 1988 to 1989 was also clouded by a dark family secret that had come to light.
A skeleton in the closet?
Joan Rogers, the younger brother that owned the farm with Hal and Joe, also lived in a trailer on the farm. It was no secret that he was considered a bit odd amongst the small community. I don't know his connection or history with the military, if there is any, But supposedly he wore army fatigues and would talk to people about being on missions for the Secret Service or the CIA. Clearly, neither of those organizations are sending personnel back to their small hometown to work on a family farm for a mission. So no one took it seriously.
Right.
And everyone kind of just thought, well, he's a little weird, but
kooky.
You know, like small towns, like I think most small towns have people like that. They're weird,
Yeah,
but
they
there are weird.
Right.
We just deal with it.
It reminds me of Corpsewood Manor. Like that town was small, but they were like, yeah, those are our weirdos over there.
Right,
like,
right. But you know, they don't harm anybody. They just, you know, it's all good. They thought he was harmless. That is until March of 1988, when a woman who lived with John accused him of violently raping her. She and John had been romantically connected at some point, but they had split up and she continued, for whatever reason, to live in the trailer. At this point, they were just essentially roommates. I presume for financial reasons, but who knows? She told police that she arrived home one evening to a man in a mask who handcuffed and blindfolded her after threatening her with a knife and then violently raped her and videotaped the entire thing. She said that she believed it was John because he talked at one point and she was fairly sure it was his voice. Her report was enough to get a search warrant to look for the videotape. And in John's trailer, the detectives found a briefcase with multiple videotapes. On one of the tapes, they found what they were looking for. And this gave way to a wider search where multiple items were found, including audio tapes and pictures. Unfortunately, they found evidence of what appeared to be multiple sexual assaults on John's niece, Michelle.
I knew that was coming.
After arresting John, detectives called Hal and Joe down to the station to break the devastating news. When they asked Michelle about it, she confirmed their worst fear. John had used every opportunity he could to rape Michelle over the previous 2 years. Whenever Hal and Joe were away on weekend trips for farm business, John would tie Michelle up, forcefully rape her, and then threaten to kill her if she told anyone. Hal and Joe were obviously horrified. They had noticed Michelle's overall demeanor changed in that time, and Joe tried to talk to her about it, but she was 14 to 16 years old, and she refused to talk about it. They hoped that it was just she's having a rough time in her teen years, and that it would pass. But they also specifically noticed that she seemed irritated by John, and she never wanted to be alone with him. Joe, again, tried to talk to her about it, but Michelle refused to say. And Hal kind of just chalked it up to personality differences. Like, what teenage girl really wants to hang out with her weird uncle that wears army fatigues and talks about the Secret Service? John, of course, denied everything. And Michelle refused to testify in court. So John was charged with only the rape to his ex-girlfriend, but he still was sentenced to 7 to 25 years.
Okay. That's a decent sentence. I mean, he won't serve that much time, but...
Probably not, but... Though Michelle was relieved that John was gone, the entire thing tore the big Rogers family apart, which devastated Hal. Irene Rogers, Hal and John's mother, accused Michelle of lying and stood by her son.
I never understand that, because you should rally around the family member who is the victim in that case. And I never understand it. I really don't.
She not only said that within the family, she went around town in this small town telling people that her granddaughter was lying, even though he was convicted of raping this other woman.
And there's like footage and audio tapes.
Yes. He thought he was being smart by not recording Michelle on a videotape.
Right.
But he had pictures of her, but she was like blindfolded and her face was covered. So like he thought that they wouldn't realize that that's Michelle. And apparently he thought that, I guess, that they just wouldn't be able to prove that it's Michelle on the audio tapes, even though it's her voice. It was weird.
Well, he doesn't seem like the smartest tool in the shed.
No, not at all. So Hal did the right thing, though. He cut contact with his parents over it.
Good.
But he also became extremely depressed. For months after it all came out, he locked himself in the trailer that John once lived in, sometimes for days at a time. No doubt he was feeling a hurricane of emotions. Guilt for not recognizing the signs, anger, grief. I mean, even though these people are being
he's still
terrible,
losing
he's
his family.
Losing his entire family.
Yeah, it's hard.
While I think this likely did more damage than good, I definitely don't think he was trying to intentionally hurt Joe or his daughters.
I agree with you.
When asked about Michelle's dislike of John, Hal is quoted as saying, "If I'd known what it was, I'd have killed the son of a bitch to start with."
Sounds like a dad to me.
Yes. By spring of the following year, they all began to feel some sense of a new normal and were desperately wanting to get away. After all, farm life does not really allow for such things, but Michelle was 17 and Christe was 14, so they were running out of time before the girls would be grown and possibly gone if they decided to get out of their small town. Unfortunately, the rain that spring came late, which delayed the planting season, so when the last week of May rolled around, Hal made the decision to stay home to work the farm. Because at this point, he's down a man, his brother's gone, and he only had a couple farm hands that couldn't be held responsible for the whole production.
Right.
Joe and the girls were set on going. They were like, we need a break. We need to get out of here. We need a vacation. So they were gone. We're leaving. Sorry, Hal. Have fun.
Yeah.
With the cows. After Joe caught some sleep,
thank goodness for that,
the three set out in the family's 1986 Oldsmobile. Though they originally discussed going to closer destinations, they ultimately decided to make the 1,000 plus mile trip to Florida. They had only a week to spare and had several places they wanted to visit. This was not a relaxing vacation by any means.
Yeah.
But I think when you're like a busy
you can't
person,
relax.
I don't think
they
would know what to do to just like come and lounge on the
exactly.
beach the entire time.
She has no idea. Do you know how hard it is to be a relaxer? Okay. I prime myself on my ability to just like do nothing. I say as somebody who can't do nothing.
I cannot. I can, but then I don't actually relax because I feel guilty the entire time.
That's right.
Yeah.
I mean, on a side note, that's why I love cruises, because there's literally, I can't do anything. So it forces me to do nothing, but I do love that. Yeah. But yeah, I mean, finding a trip which is still escapism and it's a way for them to get away is the best that they could do for themselves at that point.
Yes. So the first day, they popped over to the Jacksonville Zoo, and then they headed down to Silver Springs, where they took a glass-bottom boat tour around the famous crystal clear waters. The next day, they headed to Orlando to visit the theme parks. First, a day at SeaWorld, and then off to Disney, where they hit up both Epcot and Hollywood Studios, although at the time, I think it was MGM Studios. With only a day or two left, they wanted to see the Gulf Coast beaches. They had stayed in touch with Hal and Michelle's boyfriend, Jeff, throughout the entire trip, sending postcards and calling when they could. And if that sounds weird to anybody, remember we're in 1989, the Postal Service was much faster.
Yeah, they'd just be sending postcards.
Because now, if you take a week vacation in Florida from Ohio and you send postcards, you'll get home before your postcards.
Right. But that's because we travel a lot faster too. Now.
No, they drove.
Oh, you're right. They were in the Oldsmobile, I remember.
Yeah, they drove. So, but still, I have family in Ohio. I'm from Ohio. And the mail takes forever.
Oh, it sucks here too, man.
It sucks everywhere.
COVID really did a number on the
No,
US
even
Postal
when I
Service.
first moved here, the mail here is stupid.
Do you,
but now it's just as stupid in Ohio.
Okay. Do you think it's like an area specific thing? Because our area used to be, it's not really much anymore, but it used to be like when we first moved here, everything moved slower because it was like the beach island lifestyle. Everything is slower.
Well, this has to do with like cutting costs, I assume.
Oh.
Because the reason that the mail was slower here and why it's slower in Ohio now too is that there just isn't as many actual post offices as there used to be. So here, our mail, even if you're mailing something within the same county that we live in, that you and I live in,
I know.
Our mail goes all the way to Tampa.
Yes, it does.
Is processed and then comes all the way back.
Which is horrible for the environment too.
Yes. And Ohio used to have more, and they've since, from what I've been told by family members, they have since changed the way they process stuff, and they do the same thing. From my hometown in Ohio, if you mail something, it goes all the way up to Cleveland, Ohio, then comes back. Why? If you work for the U.S. Postal System, please
explain this to me.
Please explain this to us. This does not seem like the most efficient process. I'm just saying.
What you mean Arkansas? Why not? What you mean Arkansas? Why not Arkansas?
Yeah.
Explain it to me. That's a vine. I'm sorry. Anyway.
I love it, and I agree. Why not Arkansas?
What you mean Arkansas?
So, Hal was looking forward to welcoming them home that weekend, but was glad that they were having a good time. On Thursday, June 1st, Joe checked them all into the Days Inn at Rocky Point. The hotel sat on the shoreline of the Tampa Bay and was an affordable way to catch such a gorgeous view of the sunset.
This is like really in our backyard, huh?
Yeah.
I mean, you said Gulf Beaches, and I was like, oh, that's near us. But like, yeah.
They were looking forward to having a day to relax on the beach before heading back to work at home milking cows. I'm sorry.
Oh gosh. I think if reincarnation is a thing, whatever I do wrong in this life,
you're gonna end up being
my
a
personal
cow.
hell is being a cow. I think I just don't.
A dairy cow
Specifically. It just sounds horrific. I can't.
Well, maybe you would luck out and end up like as a rescue cow on one of the rescue
But they still have to
farms.
milk you. Like, I can't. We gotta change the subject. I can't talk about this anymore.
Okay.
Oh no. It's terrible.
So it's not clear exactly how they spent the afternoon of June 1st, but they were seen at dinner that evening. The last picture found on their camera roll was the view from the hotel balcony. And then Joe, Michelle, and Christe were not seen again until Sunday, June 4th. A group sailing back home to Tampa after a trip to Key West saw something floating in the water just past the Skyway Bridge. As they approached, they realized it was the body of a woman floating face down with her hands and feet bound and a yellow rope around her neck.
Oh my gosh.
She was also naked from the waist down. They radioed the Coast Guard, and a rescue boat was sent out to recover the body. The recovery was difficult, though, because there was clearly something heavy attached to the other end of the rope. They could not lift whatever it was, so they cut the line and made note of the coordinates, hoping to go back and find whatever it was. Before they reached the shore, they were dispatched back out because a second body was found by two people on another sailboat just north of where the first was. This female was found just 2 miles off the pier in St. Petersburg, and just like the first, was face down, bound with yellow rope around her neck, and naked below the waist. While the crew was in the middle of recovering the second body, another call came in with a report of a third female body in the same condition that was sighted a couple hundred yards to the east of where they were. All three were bloated and badly decomposing.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing they could tell for certain was that they were relatively young white women. With the second and third bodies, they were able to recover the cinder blocks that were attached at the opposite end of the ropes. Even more disturbing than all of this was that when the one who turned out to be Michelle was pulled out of the water, it appeared that she had gotten one of her hands free from the rope and started to remove the duct tape from her mouth, indicating that she had still been alive when dropped into the water.
Oh my God.
Detectives suspected that all three had been sexually assaulted due to the fact that they were nude from the waist down, and questioned whether they were all thrown into the water alive, but they had to wait for the autopsy to know for sure.
Yeah.
They also had to identify them before they could possibly know where to begin searching for the perpetrator. Back in Ohio, they had not heard from Joe or the girls since Thursday, and they had expected them home by Sunday the 4th. And we've established it's 1989. There are no cell phones.
Yeah.
You can't track people.
We're not pinging your Find My iPhone.
Yeah. So Hal began calling all of Joe's family and friends to see if any of them had heard from her.
Right.
When he confirmed that no one had, he went to the Van Wert Sheriff's Department to file a missing persons report. He could literally do nothing but pace the floor at home, thinking about the 1,000+ miles between there and Florida and all the different things that could have happened to them. Did something happen in Florida? Did something happen along the drive home? When the news continued to circulate the Tampa area that 3 women's bodies were found in the bay, a Days Inn maid finally made the connection on Thursday, June 8th, a week after Joe and the girls were last seen. She spoke with the manager about the guests in room 251. She informed him that the room had been left untouched for days. It appeared that they checked into their room, took their items up, but the beds had never been slept in, nor had the showers ever been used.
So they went out for dinner and didn't come back, basically. Because you said they were seen at dinner.
Yes. So that's what it appeared to be. The manager called the Tampa police to let them know they had guests missing. Detectives searched the room and collected evidence, including fingerprints from the room. While they worked on matching the prints from the room to the women's bodies, detectives made preliminary identification through the hotel registration. They then called the Van Wert County Sheriff and let them break the news to Hal, which was good because one of the sheriff deputies actually had known Hal since they were kids. And
oh, okay.
Yeah, small town.
Right.
So.
Oh, right. I'm sorry. You said it, but it took a second for me to realize that they were in person. It wasn't like they were called anyway.
Right. Hal was devastated, but he kept working.
Well, right.
What's he gonna do?
That's when you're a workhorse like that. That's all you know how to do, and you have to just keep putting one foot in front of the other.
Yep. Meanwhile, detectives continued working to piece things together. They found Joe's Oldsmobile parked at a boat ramp just a couple miles from the Days Inn. Inside, they found various items, including a sheet of Days Inn stationery with directions from the hotel to the boat ramp. Beside the instructions was written blue with white, which they presumed to mean a blue and white boat. The next lead came from the Ohio sheriff. While talking with him about the Rogers family, he told them about Joan Rogers and the nightmare Michelle had gone through. Though John was in prison, they didn't discount the possibility that he arranged for the murders. Mm-hmm. 2 detectives headed to Ohio to find out more. Once there, they interviewed Hal and were surprised by his demeanor or behavior. He was really rather stoic. Even at the funeral, he refused to break down in front of anyone, though I personally think that had more to do with the fact that his mother was there and they saved her a seat right next to Hal.
Yeah, and that's tense because they haven't really been speaking, and
he was still very angry at her, and He's quoted as saying he was ready to cold cock her.
Love it.
Yeah. So I think that probably had more to do with why he didn't feel comfortable crying at the funeral. While his demeanor and behavior seemed a bit suspicious, detectives confirmed his whereabouts from June 1st through the 4th and knew there was no way he went down to Florida, killed his family, and came back. It wasn't happening.
Mm-mm.
Nor did they find anything unexplainable within his finances. I think they found that he took out a large chunk of cash from his bank account while he was pacing because he considered going down to Florida to like help look for them himself. Right. But then he decided against it because he was like, Joe wouldn't want me wrecking our whole lives, the farm and everything. Right. So he didn't. So he could prove like, yeah, I took the money out, but then I didn't go anywhere.
Yeah.
And I still have it. Here it is. Next, they looked into whether John could have set something up from prison. They found that he didn't really have the connections within the prison to have orchestrated something like that. And the only visitors and mail he had received were from his parents.
Right.
Hal agreed that his brother could be capable of it, but he said he didn't believe John would have had the opportunity to do it. They were hoping that somewhere they would find a witness that saw something because they had next to nothing to go on. No questionable fingerprints were found in the hotel room or their car. The autopsies weren't much help either. All they could say for sure was that they died from asphyxiation.
Right.
The water both washed away evidence and caused decomp to a point that they could not definitively say whether Joe, Michelle, and Christe had been raped, nor could they definitively say whether the asphyxiation was caused by strangling or drowning.
Right. So they were pretty far.
Yeah. And being in the Tampa Bay for 3 days.
Yeah, that'll do it.
Detectives leaned toward the theory that there were likely 2 attackers, thinking it would take more than one person to subdue 3 women. But all 3 of them had a certain amount of fear of the water because none of them had been taught to swim properly. In fact, Joe could not swim at all. With nothing more to go on, they started at square one and retraced Joe and the girls' movements since entering Florida. They interviewed everyone they could get to along the route and sites the women had taken. They consulted with various experts, including a tidal expert from the University of South Florida who confirmed that they had been dropped in the deep water from a boat based on where they were found and the flow of the water in the days leading up to the discovery. They interviewed dozens of individuals at the boat dock and the hotel in an attempt to find a witness who saw them or might know who has a blue and white trim boat. They offered a $5,000 reward for any information that led to an arrest. More than 800 tips rolled in, and they did their best to follow up on every one that they deemed credible. And every one led to a dead end. As the weeks, then months went by, their focus had to be placed elsewhere. So the group of 20 investigators that had been working on the case initially was cut eventually to 4 and then to 2. Meanwhile, in Ohio, everyone close to Joe, Michelle, and Christe grieved and struggled to understand how something so horrific could happen. Al certainly had it the hardest, though. Not only because they were his world, but because, well, it's a small town. And what do small town people do when strange or scary things happen?
They talk.
They gossip. Those who didn't know Hal began speculating and spreading rumors about how the whole Rogers family was weird, and he likely did have his whole family slaughtered.
No, come on now. Let's not be. Well, I don't like the face you're making, so I'm very conflicted.
Oh, sorry. No, it's not that.
Oh, okay. I was like, can we leave the poor man alone? I'm sure he has an incredible mustache.
He does.
I'm definitely imagining a mustache.
It's the late 80s.
Oh, he's got
a lot
that
of the
stash,
all of the men have mustaches at this point. So, fortunately, he wasn't a stranger there. He grew up there. And so he had friends in town, and they helped combat the lies being told about him. But still, he could feel all the stares whenever he went places. And finally, a break came in October of 1989 when an officer passed along a bulletin about a rape case to the lead detective on the Rogers case. In it, the victims stated they were raped on a light blue and white boat on May 15th, which was just 2 weeks before Joe and the girls arrived to Tampa. The victim in this case was a Canadian tourist, so the lead detectives from each of the cases flew to Canada together to interview her again. She told them she and a friend had been on vacation at Madeira Beach when they stopped at a 7-Eleven and a man in the parking lot struck up conversation. She could only give a general description of his vehicle and a fairly good description of the man.
Okay.
He told her that his name was Dave Posner or Posno, but she couldn't remember for sure. She did remember that he said he owned an aluminum company and lived in Bradenton, Florida.
Oh my gosh, it's literally in our backyard.
He seemed nice, and he offered to take the two ladies out on his boat the next afternoon.
Okay.
When the time came, she wanted to go, but her friend didn't, so she went alone. I don't think I need to say it in this day and age, but friends don't let friends meet strange men on boats, period. But definitely not alone.
Well, if your friend wants to go, or if you don't want to go and your friend, I'm so sorry. If you want to go and your friend doesn't want to go, guess what? You don't get to go.
Mm-hmm.
It's not about the friend who didn't want to let her go by herself.
Well, right. I mean that either way.
Yeah.
But if I had been the friend that didn't want to go, didn't feel comfortable going, and my friend was like, no, I still want to go, I'd literally hold her hostage.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
You're not going.
We aren't going.
We are not going.
We are not going.
Yeah.
That's not happening.
This is where it gets creepier, though. He actually took her out for a while that afternoon. He was nice. He made conversation. And when they got back to shore, he offered to take her and her friend out again for a sunset cruise.
So now he's earned their trust.
Yeah. But was it to earn her trust, or was it that he wanted both of them to come out?
I mean, both probably.
Again, she wanted to go, and now she didn't have any fear or misgivings about it. I went once. He brought me back. It was fine. Right?
I'm sorry. I'm not going on a stranger's boat.
And that's what her friend said. So her friend was like, I am still not going. She went again. And everything was fine until it started to get dark, and they were still quite a ways from shore. He began telling her how pretty she was and how he'd like to have sex with her.
Oh, no.
When she refused, he insisted and moved in, physically touching and hugging her. She tried screaming, and he told her, quote, "What are you doing? Nobody's going to hear you. What are you going to do? Jump off the boat?"
Yes. I mean, no, but...
Yeah. And it's the evening. You're in a bay.
You know what happens in the evenings in the bay? Sharks.
Exactly.
Sharks and dolphins and manatees and stingrays and turtles, and we got a lot of wildlife.
Exactly. Especially back then.
Oh, yeah.
Because the waters weren't as polluted.
Well, we have more manatees because of the polluted water, because they like the heat. Anyway.
So he then threatened by asking, is sex something worth losing your life over?
It's not sex. It's rape.
Well, yeah, but at that point, he was trying to convince her.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sure either way, he viewed it as that.
Oh, right.
On the way back to the shore, he told her that he knew she would report what he'd just done, but he said he'd appreciate it if she'd wait just a little so he could tell his mother before police show up and give her a heart attack because she's old and can't take it.
I don't even really have a comment.
He then stopped several times to throw up over the side of the boat.
He doesn't seem to have the constitution for this.
She told police she thought at first it might be remorse for what he'd done, but then realized it was more likely because he knew he might get caught.
Yeah.
Whether he killed her or not, because her friend could still identify him.
Right.
The similarities to what they suspected happened with the Rogers were too much to ignore.
Yeah.
So they asked her to help them make a composite sketch. Obviously, the investigators on her case never found a Dave Posner or Posno that lived in Bradenton. So they publicized the composite sketch and drew in more than 400 tips, which all ended up worthless.
I was going to say, I feel like that would be a good amount because it's a small area.
They had so many tips throughout this whole case. It's insane. Upon the year anniversary of the case, the new sergeant to the homicide department decided to put together a team of new investigators to work with the two detectives that had worked the longest on the case to review everything. Let's start over.
Fresh eyes. Makes total sense.
They found that as thorough as the investigation had been, there were still some items of potential evidence that had never been fully processed, and some tips left unchecked that could use some follow-up. While the team combed back through the evidence and re-interviewed many of those that were interviewed early on, a woman named Joanne Steffi struggled with the belief that her neighbor could be the attacker. She believed he matched the composite sketch. He previously had a blue and white boat, but sold it shortly after the time of the murders. And he had a vehicle that possibly matched the description the Canadian rape survivor had given.
That's tough.
Out of fear, she failed to file an official report with the proper department and instead simply mentioned it to a Hillsborough County sheriff she happened to know. He either didn't report it or the report was disregarded because it never made its way to the team of investigators on the actual case. The team did, however, have an FBI profile to work from. They believed it to be an individual serial killer, likely a white man between 30 and 40 years of age and above average intelligence. He likely had strong social skills, seemed respectable, and was obviously affluent enough to own a boat.
Them boat people. What kind of boat are we talking? I think that's important. Or like what kind of boat are we talking about?
It's a bayliner. It was a decent sized
boat.
Like
so,
it's not like
so
a
decent.
Yacht.
Okay, so yeah, affluent enough to own a boat is relative to the type of boat.
Yeah.
Because
I mean,
there are some little like aluminum skiff boats or things that you look at on a dock and you're like, that should not float.
Yeah, no, this was a decent boat. Okay. I mean, it wasn't like crazy huge or crazy fancy, but it was a decent size
like center
boat.
console type boat.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
Okay.
They predicted that he likely enjoyed the suffering of others and had fantasized about such crimes long before carrying them out. They also did not believe that Joe, Michelle, and Christe were his first murder victims.
Oh, interesting.
Typically, predators are not confident enough to take on so many victims unless they have experience.
Right.
They also informed detectives that he likely would not stop killing until he's caught and suggested that they use the media to help them in their search.
All right.
They said that it would help to have the public looking for him as well because he won't be easy to find. He'll look like any other well-respected, everyday, law-abiding citizen. And then Hal Rogers came to mind again. But they had re-interviewed him, and he truly seemed to be living like a grief-struck man. There was also something a bit strange about his demeanor, so they asked him to take a polygraph. He He agreed, and in May of 1991, nearly 2 years after the murders, he passed with flying colors.
Honestly, justice for my man. I don't feel like
this
is justified.
Feel horrible for Hal Rogers.
I don't think why are they looking at him so? I mean, I get it. That's the first place you look.
Initially, yes. Like, of course, you're gonna look at the family. You're gonna okay, but this is new. The new sergeant on the case, Sergeant Moore, was very thorough.
Okay, I mean, if there's new people and he wants to be sure.
Yeah,
fine.
Yeah, but still, it doesn't make you feel any less bad for Hal, because I'm sure he's sitting there thinking, my God.
Well, right, he's having to relive it.
Yeah. So Sergeant Moore called a press conference and publicly ruled Hal out as a suspect, stating Mr. Rogers is a victim in this case. So,
okay, we're done.
We're done looking at Hal.
Good.
He went on to share the details of the FBI profile and told the public they were not giving up. Still, they got nothing. Unsolved Mysteries aired a segment on the case in the fall of 1991. Still, they got nothing. Sergeant Moore continued holding press conferences and keeping the case in the public eye, hoping that they would eventually get a tip that would lead to something. Throughout the entire investigation, they had been sitting on a piece of evidence, though, that they thought was merely just something a helpful person in the area had given to Joe. By the spring of 1992, when they were nearly at the end of their rope, they decided to share this last thing with the media. Handwritten directions to the Days Inn on a travel brochure looked once to them like something just a good Samaritan provided for a vacationer looking for a reasonable place to stay. And now they viewed it differently. When looking at the FBI profile and the testimony of the Canadian tourist who met her rapist at the 7-Eleven, they suspected that the writing could be that of the killer. When Joanne Steffi, the lady who thought her neighbor was the killer, saw the news story, including the written directions, she knew she had to follow up about her neighbor. He had since moved from that area since she spoke with the Hillsborough County Sheriff, and she never knew if he had ever been investigated. She never saw police come or anything. And the story with the handwriting sample also suggested that the perpetrator likely worked near the place that he had met Joe, Michelle, and Christe. So Joanne started thinking, well, I remember that he was an aluminum contractor, but I don't know where his place of business was. But she knew somebody who did. Another neighbor, Moselle Smith, had hired him to build an aluminum porch. So she went over and asked Moselle, hey, where did he work? And Moselle recalled that he worked out of his house. Joanne explained her suspicion, and it occurred to Moselle that she still had the documentation from the transaction with his writing on it.
Yep.
Once it was found, they pulled out, they look at it, they compare that to what's on the newspaper, and they believed it to be the same. The writing was quite distinct. He capitalized certain letters, no matter their position in words or sentences. The sizing of each letter was kind of chaotic. And most distinctly, he often added a sort of hook to his lowercase y's. Like that extra little...
yeah.
Almost like a scallop shape. Yeah. I personally have only seen that little hook on a Y from teen girls in the 1990s.
Yeah.
So I found that quite funny. This time, Joanne Steffi contacted the correct department.
Right.
And she faxed over what information she had. But it simply ended up in the mass of other tips and information. Anxious to find answers because the chief gave a deadline of mid-August of 1992, The investigators found someone to volunteer to pay for a billboard of the handwriting sample to be put up. Joanne Steffi was incredulous when she saw the billboard. She's like, they're desperate enough to put up a billboard for information that I have already given them and they've done nothing with. She called again and was told that they still had what she sent, but that they were working their way through a backlog of tips. So Moselle Smith, the other neighbor, her daughter got involved as well and called. And she was told the same thing initially, but she persisted, sending a strongly worded letter along with the same information that had been previously faxed over.
People forget how the power of a letter.
Yeah.
I'm going to write a letter.
So the detective who spoke with them finally went to her superior and made him aware that these women in Tampa were insistent that they know who the killer could be.
Right.
One of the detectives on the team went to speak with Moselle Smith and take a look at the contract in person. But at this point, these women are like, you people are incompetent.
You idiots.
So she didn't trust him. She made him sign a notarized statement to give him the original document. She's like, I'm not giving it to you. I'm not giving you this. I have a notary on hand.
I need a chain of custody for this document.
Yes.
Honestly, genius.
Yeah.
She's so smart.
Absolutely.
Also, everybody should have an on-call notary.
Yeah, she's like, I have a friend who's a notary. She will be right here. You sign this document saying you took that because I am not going to be responsible for not having this killer be caught.
I'm Alicia's on-call notary. Whenever Alicia's kids have stuff that needs to be notarized, she can't do it herself. So
no, I can't. I wouldn't have been able to sign my own kids' stuff. But so they had just 2 weeks at this point to like wrap this thing up before their deadline. So at this point, they're like moving fast. We got to get this done. So they have a handwriting expert examine the samples, and detectives scrambled to find out more about this former neighbor. His name was Oba Chandler.
Oba?
Oba Chandler. And they quickly discovered he was a 45-year-old white man.
Here's some information about Oba. Siri heard us. Oba, Wikipedia. Oba means ruler in the... I don't want to offend anybody because I can't say any of those words.
Okay.
But Siri decided to tell us what
Oba.
It
means a ruler.
Like a monarch, not like a ruler.
Not, well, yeah. I don't think anybody's
sorry
naming their kid measuring stick.
Anyway, sorry, white guy named Oba.
Yes. He was 45 years old and had moved across the state to Port Orange, a city near Daytona Beach. They confirmed he had lived where Joanne and Moselle had said. He had owned a 21-foot Bayliner boat with a blue exterior and a white interior at the time of the murders. He also had a long criminal history.
Oh.
Including charges for counterfeiting, kidnapping, burglary, and armed robbery.
He was a very busy man.
That he was. As detectives were saying, it all looked promising, but they didn't want to get their hopes up. Marilyn Johnson, an office assistant who happened to be right there, raised her hand. When Sergeant Moore asked if she had a question, she said, quote, I don't know if you noticed or not, but this guy looks just like the composite.
Don't know if you've made the connection, but we do have a picture that matches the picture.
In all the rush to find out information on the guy, no one thought to compare the pictures.
Yeah. I mean, they're all just like trying to scramble and find it, and somebody's like, I hate to be the obvious person, but like, he looks just like his picture.
Yeah. Marilyn also reminded them that the Canadian rape victim had told them that her attacker said he owned an aluminum company.
Oh, he does look just like his composite sketch.
Guys, I truly believe it's the assistants that make the world go round.
We really do, honestly. I mean, seriously, nobody would be anywhere without us. Like,
Yeah.
I had to Google the composite sketch versus his face.
Yes.
And
it's
she's
quite
right.
similar.
It's very similar.
Yeah. So, Sergeant Moore got approval to extend the investigation so that they could run surveillance on Oba. Simultaneously, some investigators worked on digging into his background. So here's a little background on Mr. Oba Chandler. He was born October 11th, 1946 in Cincinnati, Ohio. He was the fourth of 5 children, and when he was just 10 years old, his father, Oba Chandler Sr., hung himself in the basement of the family's apartment building.
Oh my goodness. Okay.
His life from that point was nothing but chaos. He was arrested 20 times before even turning 18, which included at least one peeping Tom charge. He had married multiple times and fathered 8 kids with 7 different women. Almost to the day a year before the Canadian tourist was raped, Oba had married Deborah Ann Whiteman. 9 months later, in February of 1989, Deborah gave birth to a daughter.
Oh no, he procreated.
Yeah, did you not hear the 8 kids with 7 different women?
Oh, I did not hear that. I'm so sorry.
Yeah, he had been married multiple times, but officially he has 8 kids with 7 different women.
Wow. No, I found a picture of him on his boat, which was giving me the heebie-jeebies. So I was saving that to make sure that I showed everybody, and I did completely miss that. I am sorry.
Yes. So, yeah, Deborah had given birth to their daughter in February of 1989.
Mm-hmm.
So when the rape happened to the Canadian tourists, when Joe, Michelle, and Christe were killed, his daughter was 5 to 6 months.
Yeah, he had like
old.
An infant at home.
5 months old. Records confirmed Oba sold his boat just 3 months after the murder of Joe, Michelle, and Christe. Detectives also found that he and Deborah abruptly abandoned their house in Tampa in the summer of 1990. So, like a year later.
Mm-hmm.
Abandoned. Didn't just move.
They left all their stuff.
They took stuff. I don't know for sure, like, how much stuff,
right.
But they took stuff, but they, like, abandoned it right at the time in the investigation when things really ramped up and the media coverage started, like, talking more specific details and releasing the sketch and stuff like that. But so they just took off and they stopped making payments on their mortgage. So after failing to make payments for nearly a year, and the bank was unable to find them, to contact them, the bank just foreclosed on the home and sold it. And the reason they couldn't be found was because they had put their lease for their home in Port Orange in their daughter's name.
Okay, I understand why they have done such a thing. But I do want to know how.
Yeah.
Who did not require ID to lease this property?
Well, leasing things back then was not like it is today. So it's not surprising that they got away with that.
Yeah.
Today, I don't see how you could get away with that unless you just find some individual that owns a property and they just don't do as thorough of checks. But yeah, so the Chandlers had been living a lovely little suburban life in Port Orange. Their new neighbors told investigators that Oba was friendly, and when he bought a new boat, he would offer rides to neighborhood children to go fishing.
No.
As they were discovering all this disturbing information, analysts were comparing his prints from prison records to those found on the brochure that had the written directions to the Days Inn. And they found a match to his right palm print. A handwriting analysis also concluded that he very well could have been the person who wrote the directions on the brochure. So, 2 detectives flew back to Canada to speak with the rape victim yet again. Despite 3 years passing, she recalled all the same details as she went through her other statements. Like, she was good. She was spot on. And when she was done this time, they pulled out an envelope with 6 photos and asked her to look at each one carefully. When she got to the 3rd photo, she stopped and asked them if they really wanted to know. They gave a confirming nod, and she threw the photo down on the table and said, "My initial reaction is him." It was, in fact, a photo of Oba Chandler. The investigators were prepared for that response. They had actually brought one of the assistant state attorneys along on the trip as well, and so then he questioned her more carefully. And again, she kept all the details straight, and they felt her testimony would really hold up in court. So they finally had enough to get a warrant for his arrest, and they were taking all precautions, watching his every move until they were ready to close in on him. It was truly quite dramatic from the sound of it, but I think they were concerned he would figure out they were onto him and then flee. So they made a plan and were prepared to arrest him the morning of Thursday, September 17th, 1992. And then he did exactly what they were trying to avoid, but not because he was on to them. He got into his car and he just literally drove out of town. So they followed him as far as they could. They had both air and people on the ground following him.
I was going to say, this is Florida. If I know, they're using copters, man. They got them choppers in the air.
Yeah. So they followed him as far as they could, but lost him when a rainstorm hit.
Oh, no.
They traced several calls coming into the Chandler's home from up north in Kentucky and then in Ohio. So they waited, watched, and hoped that he was just on a trip visiting his hometown. Deborah and their daughter were still at home in Port Orange, so they were like, we have to have faith that he will come back.
Right.
We have no reason to believe that he's leaving his wife and daughter. Exactly 1 week later, he did just that. He was on his way back. They traced a call to Elysia County.
Yeah.
And assumed that he would take the main route of I-95 back home. So they placed unmarked vehicles along the interstate at exits and waited. And when he pulled off at Port Orange exit and stopped at a gas station, they surrounded him. He stayed calm and did not resist, but asked what he was being arrested for. When the officer stated sexual battery, Oba reportedly did not even flinch.
Yeah.
I mean, you would think if somebody hadn't committed sexual battery at some point in their life, they would be like,
oh my God, no, not me.
What? What are you talking about? Not him. He just was like, okay. But he's also has a long criminal history.
Right.
Which plays into how he behaves. So this was, as we know, not Oba's first rodeo. So detectives attempted to get him to talk, but it did not work. He said nothing, but I want a lawyer. Despite his...
I hate when they say that.
I know. Despite his criminal history, Sergeant Moore noted that the FBI profile was spot on. He looked, at this point in his life, he looked like an everyday middle-aged guy.
He does. He looks a lot like an actor. I saw a picture and now I am only picturing him as one of the actors that
There was really nothing specifically scary or evil looking about him.
No.
The next day, he was arraigned and charged with rape, and the judge set bail at $1 million. Detectives and prosecutors hoped to finalize the evidence against him while he was being held for the rape charge.
Mm-hmm.
They had quite a bit of circumstantial evidence, but they needed more. So they worked in overdrive and thankfully found more. They tracked down his old boat and searched both his former Tampa home as well as his Port Orange home. Through those searches, they connected something to do with the boat's engine, but I don't have all those details yet. Like, it comes up in the trial, like something else comes up in the trial, but somehow there was evidence to do with the boat engine before that as well.
It's okay to say, I don't know anything about boat engines.
Yeah, I actually give a disclaimer on that when we get to the part of the trial. They also found a shirt that I think they believed matched what the rape victim described that he was wearing when she met him or something. So it's just to point out that they did find things, but there wasn't like this overwhelming amount of evidence.
Right.
So they flew down the Canadian victim and her friend who had vacationed with her, where both of them did a lineup with Oba, and they both pointed him out in person as well. They spoke with one of Oba's older children, Crystal Mays, who informed them that Oba had visited her in late 1989 and confessed that he was on the run because the Florida police were looking for him on suspicion of rape and murder. Her husband, Rick, confirmed that Oba had made even more incriminating statements to him, like once Crystal walked away. He basically had confessed to raping a couple women and throwing at least one of them overboard his boat. And then, like, in the next breath, he then straight up was like, yeah, I murdered 3 women. So.
And we didn't think to maybe call the police.
Yeah, that doesn't sit well with me.
We didn't think to maybe say, anonymous tip. Let me call Crime Stoppers.
Yeah. So that was enough. They indicted him on 3 counts of first-degree murder through a grand jury, but it would be another 2 years before the trial took place. This was a massively complicated case with thousands of details for both sides to consider before it could be argued in court. One of the state attorney's investigators still felt they were missing something, though, and he was right. Even though they had collected phone records for Oba, they were told by the company that the records from May and June of 1989 had been purged.
Oh, I didn't know you could do that.
So, well, back then, now everything's digital, but back then they literally had...
Oh, yeah, they literally shredded it.
Paper, so after so many years, they would be allowed to shred it, but they still technically had it. They had it on microfiche. You never had to use one of those, did you?
I've never heard of one. Like, I've never heard microfiche be used.
Yeah. It's basically, do you know old film?
Yeah.
Okay. It works. It's like that, but it's like smaller.
Okay.
And so they would take pictures of the documents before they purged them. They would take pictures of it and have it. So if you go to a library and you are researching something, now I think most places have digitized stuff.
Yeah.
But somewhere out there, I imagine there are probably still some documents that you can only find on microfiche. I would be willing to bet that because of all the documents of everywhere, like,
there's
how far back have we really digitized things?
Okay. You learn something every day.
It basically, the machine that you use for it to view it is kind of like a projector screen in front of you, and you just scroll through and you have like articles and
interesting
old books that they don't want you handling. They would actually put on microfiche so you could like scroll through, and they usually would have it in, a timeline. So the company still had the microfiche. They just didn't want to look through and find them. Okay. The state attorney's investigator had a contact within the company, though, and that person was a former FBI agent who is now working security, some kind of security thing for the phone company. And so he calls his friend and says, I'm looking for this. And the friend's like, let me see what I can do. And within a couple days, they had exactly what statements they needed. On the May statement, it showed that on May 15th, 1989, the day of the rape of the Canadian tourist, a call was made to Oba and Deborah's house at 5:49 p.m. A collect call. Mm-hmm. Sorry, that's important.
Yes.
A collect call was made at 5:49 p.m. to their house. On June 2nd, 1989, just hours after the disappearance of Joe, Michelle, and Christe, 5 collect calls were made to the Chandlers' home at 1:12 a.m., at 1:30 a.m., at 1:38 a.m., and then not again until 8:11 a.m. and 9:52 a.m. All of the calls came from the same number despite the crimes taking place in different areas. The investigator didn't understand why, so he called his contact at the phone company again and asked, "Can you tell me about this number? I don't understand." That guy informed the investigator that it was a special billing number solely used for billing purposes to designate marine phone calls, meaning the calls were made from someone on a boat out on the water. The investigator also learned that this meant that whoever made those calls had to get on the boat's radio and call a special marine phone operator first, and then the operator would patch the caller through. These operators also kept records of all the calls, listing the time, the duration, and often the name of the person making the call.
Right.
Sure enough, both dates and times showed that the calls were made from the Gypsy 1, which was the name of Oba's boat, and the person identified himself as Oba on the May 15th call and as OB on the June 2nd calls, at least the last one.
Right.
Prosecutors believe that the first few calls on June 2nd occurred around the time of the murders and that the last 2 occurred when Oba took the boat back out to make sure the bodies had stayed beneath the water.
Yeah.
Armed with what they believed to be the nail in Oba Chandler's coffin, the prosecution gave opening statements on a typical Florida sunny day in late September of 1994. Because of the publicity on the case, jurors were selected from Orlando and transported to Pinellas County, where they were sequestered for the duration of the trial. Oba Chandler sat confidently, observing with no sign of anxiety or fear, let alone an ounce of remorse. His defense attorney kept his opening statements relatively simple. He claimed that Oba had indeed met Michelle and Christe Rogers. For some reason, they denied that he had met Joe, but that after he wrote the directions for them on the brochure, he never saw them again. The trial moved as quickly as they could, but the prosecution called as many as 20 witnesses a day.
That is a long day in court.
Yeah, including Rollins Cooper, a labor worker who often worked with Oba around the time of the murders. He testified that the day the Rogers women went missing, Oba stopped at a job to drop off some screening to him. Rollins asked him if he was in a hurry because he just sort of handed it to him over the fence and then went to leave. So Oba said, "Yeah, I have a date with 3 women." The next morning around 7 a.m., they met at another job site, and Rollins said he noticed, quote, he was kind of grubby. So when he asked Oba about why do you look so disheveled and grubby,
you look nasty.
Oba said he was out on the boat all night. Possibly the most surprising and damaging witness to the case, though, was the Canadian tourist that he had raped.
Right.
The prosecution fought hard to make her testimony possible. They pushed for an exception to the rule that no evidence of another crime be presented during trial by arguing that the details of both crimes were so alike that they established a pattern. She was an outstanding witness, held her composure, but still gave an emotional and strong account of her experience. Several of the jurors fled to the jury room afterwards in tears.
She has been an amazing and strong person through the whole thing.
Absolutely. It was bad news for the defense.
Oh, yeah. You can't come back from that.
Oba's attorney, Fred Zinnober, said afterwards, quote, "I felt like I was fighting the Russian army with a pea shooter." He really tried. But,
yeah, I mean, what are you supposed to do?
But was grasping at straws, even bringing up Joan Rogers hiring somebody to kill them, like the theory that Joan Rogers hired somebody to kill them, until the judge scolded him for it, saying, quote, "You are not getting into Joan Rogers. Joan Rogers is a red herring. He was in prison at the time this occurred, and he did not commit this crime. And you have absolutely nothing to suggest or put before this jury that Joan Rogers hired a hitman to have them killed. So that is a moot issue."
Right? Like, stop wasting our time.
So defense called some witnesses to testify that claimed to see one or more of the Rogers women at various locations between Orlando and Tampa with a man, but none of the descriptions of the men matched one another, implying that this woman and her 2 teenage daughters had been hanging out with multiple men throughout their trip.
Right. Jezebels, they were.
Them darn dairy farm girls.
They get to this here city of Tampa.
Lose control.
St. Petersburg.
The state also countered with evidence that contradicted their testimonies. In the end, the last effort of the defense was to let Oba testify on his own behalf.
I mean, what else do you have to lose, honestly?
He, of course, stated what his attorney said in opening statements. He met them briefly and gave them directions, but then never saw them again. He then confidently claimed that the night they went missing, he was on his boat, but that he was fishing, and when he went to start the boat back up to leave, it wouldn't start. And when he checked it, he found a burst fuel hose that was leaking gasoline down into the hull. When he called home a few times and couldn't get through, he gave up and tried to arrange a tow, but had no luck, so he just spent the night on the boat. He claimed when the morning came, the Coast Guard came by in an inflatable boat, but said they couldn't help him because they had to search for a body among the rocks. So he sat there until another boat came by and was willing to tow him to the marina. He said he called home again before he left. So, those 5 phone calls that I talked about, he's trying to explain away. The first 3 were when I was trying to first get a hold of somebody.
Right.
And he claims that the last 2 calls weren't until he was being towed back and or arrived at the docks. He claimed that he never took Joe, Michelle, or Christe on his boat, nor did he kill them. After this, the court called a lunch break, during which the state attorney's investigator let them know something Oba said didn't sound quite right. See, he had thoroughly gotten familiar with Oba's boat because the state had tracked it down not only to search it, they bought it and kept it in evidence.
Yeah, they seized that thing. They said, look at me, I'm the captain now.
Exactly. He was certain that Oba was lying about the fuel leak.
Right.
They rushed to call a boat mechanic they had worked with or knew from other cases. They asked him to go look at the boat being held in evidence and go now. Can you drop everything you're doing and go right now?
What's crazy is, like, now that I've worked in litigation for a while, that is the speed at which these things happen in trial.
Oh yeah.
Like, it is nuts.
Hurry up and wait kind of.
They will literally like leave early and they'll come into the office early in the morning. They go to court all day. They come back to the office at night, and in the morning and in the evening, they are working on getting additional things for the next day.
The next day. Yes. And that's exactly what happens here.
He's calling. He's like, I need you to go now.
Yeah. So court goes back into session and it was time for the cross-examination. This prosecutor is amazing. I'm pulling this off the top of my head. I don't have it in my notes, but now that I'm like all worked up talking about it, somebody described him as saying some lawyers play checkers, some play chess. Prosecutor Crow is like in a 3-dimensional
3D
chess kind of game, all his own. Like, you will have no idea where he's taking you, and then all of a sudden he's got you.
It's like the defense team is playing checkers and he's playing that 3D chess that Sheldon plays in Big Bang Theory.
Yes, exactly. So Oba refused to answer questions about the rape trial at all. Prosecutor Crow asked him, "Are you invoking the Fifth Amendment?" He said he was, but when he asked, "Are you afraid that your answers will be incriminating?" Oba said, no, that's not it. And so he said, "So you're not afraid that they'll be incriminating?" And Oba said, "No." Prosecutor Crow says, "Well, then you can't take the Fifth Amendment because that's the purpose of the Fifth Amendment." So the defense made a sad attempt to stop it, telling the judge, "Well, my client doesn't want to answer."
Right. He doesn't want to.
The judge said, "Too bad.
Wah, wah.
He either answers or he invokes the Fifth Amendment. You can't just not answer for no reason." So Oba said, "Yes, I will invoke the Fifth Amendment." So Prosecutor Crow moved on.
Which to a jury is enough for them to go, which like they're not supposed to look at it like an admission of guilt, but the prosecutor knows that the jury is just a human being. Like they're going to look at it and go,
why else would
you answer questions?
Within a few questions about the Rogers women, the prosecutor had Oba red-faced and looking anything but confident. He claimed he had only met Michelle and Christe. He gave them directions and that he did not realize they had been murdered until the composite sketch was publicized and the two cases, the rape case and the murder case, had been connected. Prosecutor Crow was a master at questioning, as I said. So he took Oba back and forth through the timeline until he was trapped.
Yeah.
He walked him back through his own testimony during direct questioning about the boat breaking down and how he claimed to have spent the night on the water, only making calls home when he was first stuck and again later in the morning when he got towed back to shore. The prosecutor pointed out that both Rollins Cooper had testified to meeting him at the job site around 7 a.m., and the owner of the property where that job took place also testified about seeing those two men meet there around 7 a.m., but the call records showed that his last two calls home from the boat didn't take place until, as I said, 8:11 and 9:52.
Yeah,
So he asked him, "If you made those calls before you came back in to shore, Mr. Chandler, how could you have been at Mrs. Capo's residence between 7 and 7:30 a.m.?
Yeah.
Oba became flustered and completely lost his composure. He began arguing with the prosecutor and even complained to the judge. And she just warned him that it wouldn't help to argue.
Yeah. You're not helping yourself, buddy.
When the prosecutor pushed him about fleeing to Ohio, Oba claimed he was worried about the rape case, but figured they would find whoever actually killed the Rogers. "I didn't do it. I figured you just need more time to find the right guy." Okay,
Mr. Man.
During a brief break, they spoke with the mechanic and had pictures to prove Oba's testimony to how his fuel line was leaking and what he did to try and fix it were lies. Now, here's my disclaimer. As you mentioned earlier, I by no means claim to understand boats.
No.
Boats and hoes. So if I've confused something that is said, I apologize. And if you are a boat mechanic or just a boat person, please correct me nicely. There's no need to come for me, because I openly admit, like, I was slightly confused by some of the explanation, and I was trying to simplify it for those of us that aren't boat people. So, but basically, from what I gathered, the fuel line on that particular engine had something called an anti-siphon valve, which was designed to close off a leak. When the prosecutor questioned him on it, suddenly Oba said he didn't exactly know where the fuel line connected to the gas tank to the engine. Like he didn't seem to have an understanding of like how it all fit together and how it all worked, right? But the prosecutor knew he did. like, you're lying. You're not just confused. Because he openly talked about having all this knowledge of boats and taking care of boats and stuff. Oba suspects that the trap has just been, he realizes, like, oh crap, I've just set myself up. Round and round they went through the engine questions, but he let it be at that point. Because as you said, they gather stuff up and then they bring in new stuff the next day. So the next day, the defense rested, but the prosecution had some follow-up witnesses, including Robert Shidner, the Coast Guard crew member in charge of tracking that station's only inflatable boat on June 2nd, 1989. He testified the inflatable boat was not at use at all that day, nor were they called out to search for a body among the rocks.
Right. Well, I thought that when you said it, when you were talking about his testimony, I was like, I don't remember her saying that, but okay, sure.
Yeah, because
it didn't happen.
Because it did. No.
Right.
The Rogers women were found on June 4th, not June 2nd. And so there was nobody looking for a body on June 2nd. No.
And nobody was looking for a body on June 4th. They just found them.
Correct.
Right.
But the Coast Guard did get called on June 4th.
Right.
But they definitely weren't going out in an inflatable boat to pull. Yeah. Anyway. Finally, they called the mechanic who helped them the previous day. He testified that the fuel leak could not have happened the way that Oba said because the fuel line was located above the fuel tank, and the fuel would have had to travel upward through the line, defying gravity, to be shooting out into the hole. No, it's designed that way to prevent that exact thing from happening.
Yeah.
Only after this confirmation did the prosecution rest their case. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for. You know what it's going to be, right? Do we? Maybe.
I don't. I'm sorry.
The deliberation took all of 5 minutes.
Oh my gosh, you're kidding. 5 minutes?
But they all decided they needed a break.
Yeah.
So they took their time. They took an hour and a half.
They needed to take some snacks
to
pee.
Yeah, to have snacks, have a cigarette break.
Honestly,
They took their time.
And they've been sequestered, and juries who are sequestered are like annoyed. So they're like,
yeah.
Take my time.
So they took their time. An hour and a half later, they knocked on the jury room door to let the bailiff know they were done. Guilty on all 3 counts of first-degree murder. The courtroom was silent. No one was surprised. No one was elated or even horrified. Oba Chandler was sentenced to death on November 4th, 1994. The only thing that I think is worth mentioning from the appeals was that he alleged improper prosecutorial comments were personal attacks on him.
And what about it? You're a murderer.
You set yourself up, sir.
Right.
Clearly, he didn't have a leg to stand on for appeal, so this is a long case, and I'll spare y'all the boring details there. I just thought that a lot of the details in this case are what made the case.
Oh, it was so interesting.
But I found that one, like how much he hated the prosecutor, was quite funny to me.
Well, right, because he was playing checkers, and the prosecutor was playing 3D chess.
A year after his conviction, his wife Deborah divorced him, and he was no longer permitted to have contact with their daughter.
Well, good.
The rape charges for the Canadian victim were dropped since he was sentenced to death, and she wanted to be spared from testifying again.
Well, and I can't imagine or even pretend to get into her mind, but she knew that she had done everything she could.
Yeah.
You know? And what else is there?
Yeah.
And also, I think that having her testimony changed it so drastically.
Yeah.
To where it was almost like justice for her too.
Oh yeah.
The jury knew what happened.
I mean, if I were in her shoes, that's how I would feel. Yeah.
And I'm sure that the girls, Joe, Christe, Michelle would have welcomed that with open arms as well.
Yep. Oba Chandler was 65 years old when he was executed on November 15th, 2011 by lethal injection at the Florida State Prison in Rayford. Hal Rogers, he actually did come down for the trial and testify for one day, but he didn't stay. He had to get back and get back to work. He's got the farm. So Hal was interviewed just before the execution, and he said he was not over what happened, but he had definitely calmed down. He wasn't as angry.
Right.
He went through, obviously, like, life was bad for a while. He had a moment of clarity, basically, where he realized he was headed down a bad road with drinking too much and being so angry. And he just had this moment of clarity where he realized this is not what Joe or the girls would want for me. So he kind of calmed down, pulled himself together. He eventually remarried in 2001. So by the time the execution happened, he had been married for 10 years or almost 10 years. And he said that he did so when he got tired of being alone. So he said that his missing Joe, Michelle, and Christe was sometimes difficult on his relationship with his new wife, Jolene. But she too was widowed, so she at least understood to a degree.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know that she had lost children, but she had lost her first husband, so. And when asked if he would attend the execution, he said, quote, "I personally doubt it. I don't need any closure, I don't think."
Yeah.
And I don't think that he did attend. But honestly, when you've moved on.
Yeah, he's grieved.
You don't want to go back. That's like drudging it all up again. And yeah. So that is the story of the Rogers family.
Wow. That was an insane case, and I'm surprised that I hadn't heard of it, considering it's like
same.
Like literally like 30 minutes in the other direction.
Yeah.
But you did a great job. That was complicated, but
thank you. Thanks for hanging in there if you're still listening.
Yeah.
Because it was, and I know technically like you could just focus on what Oba Chandler did and not Joan Rogers and all that nonsense, but
but it gives context to why they were in Florida and
why they were in Florida and how, people would question like why people went out. Why did you go on a boat with a man you didn't know? Well, it was 1989 and people didn't.
Right.
And they're from a small town in Ohio, and they probably thought there's 3 of us. Like, what's he going to do? And whatever. But then once they get out there, then it's like, oh, we don't know how to swim.
Literally can't do anything.
And they probably didn't know how to drive a boat. And it's towards the evening. And so as we talked about, there's sharks. And even if you do know how to swim, you're out in the middle of this giant bay. And yeah,
I don't know what you do, but I'm glad that they got the justice that they deserved. And I'm glad that those women had a notarized document as to where they were sending their evidence to. And
go Joanne and Moselle.
Yeah.
That was amazing. I love that
awesome.
part.
It really was. And
that's so something I would do.
I agree. I'd be like, actually, I need to know exactly where I'm getting. No. Right.
I don't think you've proven yourself worthy of me just handing this.
2 forms of ID. I'm copying them.
Yeah.
So, but you did a great job. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you all for hanging in there and listening. So, if you are still with us and you'd like to participate for a Sunday shout out, you can leave us a cow emoji.
Oh, that's a good one. Yeah, leave us a cow emoji.
Because I know I read that the girls did love the cows.
Oh, absolutely.
And Christe actually viewed them more as pets.
Right. Well, they were dairy cows.
Yeah. So, leave us a cow emoji.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much. And we will talk to you guys next time.
Till next time.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for listening, guys. Find us on Instagram and TikTok at Burden of Proof Pod and email us at burdenofproofpod@gmail.com.